Welcome to China Freedom File. Today, we're going to talk about the text of the newly imposed Hong Kong National Security Law and its ramifications and implications to Christians, religious believers, and dissidents, protesters, and churches, and foreign services, especially religious service organizations, seminaries in Hong Kong. What does it mean to them? And what does it mean to U.S.-Hong Kong relations? And honestly, what does this ultimately mean between Hong Kong, China, versus the rest of the world? So on June 20th, the Standing Committee of China's National People's Congress, the supposedly highest body of policy making in the whole China, although everybody knows it's a rubber stamp of the Chinese Communist Party and President Xi, unveiled the text of the upcoming Hong Kong National Security Law, so-called. According to the text, there are sweeping changes on the Hong Kong's lifestyle, values, and really this is the most dramatic change since the handover of Hong Kong to China from the United Kingdom in 1997. According to the text of the law, there is a so-called National Security Commission to be established under the Chief Executive of Hong Kong. And with that National Security Commission, there is a National Security Advisor position to be established, appointed, approved by the Communist Party's national government, and with the role to supervise the national security law's implementation and the chief executive's execution of the law. And a specific government body will be imposed called the Bureau, a special Bureau of National Security in Hong Kong. And not only that, the Hong Kong's investigative body, the prosecution body, and the judicial body will also set up separate special units to investigate, to prosecute, and to try the so-called national security related cases. And according to the law, the text, it specifically says some cases from Hong Kong involving national security could be brought back to mainland China for trial. So this is a major sweep on Hong Kong's semi-autonomous status. Basically, the central government, led by the Communist Party, imposed this national security law without any consultation, any process of approval from the Hong Kong's own legislature, let alone its Hong Kong's own citizens. And making the cases of national security threat very arbitrary. Basically, anything that the national government found as a threat to its territory, to its national security elements, such as protests, such as association, such as the young students gathering together, such as the boycott of certain government legislations, and these kind of items. And actually, even the item like the high school students who chose not to sing the Chinese Communist Party's national anthem during the opening of their school is deemed as terrorist acts, as a rise, as a national security threat. So these students will face severe consequences, including criminal prosecution and criminal sentence according to this law, and up to 6 years imprisonment. So this new establishment of the National Security Commission, the National Security Advisor, and of course the so-called National Security Bureau in Hong Kong will establish and legalize a mechanism of persecution of any human rights defenders, human rights lawyers, any citizens who voice their different opinion in opposition of the Communist Party's ideology in Hong Kong and in mainland China. And this will also retroactively enable the Hong Kong investigators, prosecutors, and the judicial branch to prosecute and sentence those peaceful protesters in the past 6 to 8 months in Hong Kong by applying this law. And we can see the Communist Party's intention with the enaction of this law. It is to remove all the basic fundamental freedoms that the Hong Kongese had enjoyed over 2 centuries as a British colony, and relatively still enjoyed before this day after Hong Kong was handed over to China in 1997. So especially the judiciary independence is totally in jeopardy. There is an independent judiciary mechanism to assign judges on different cases of trial, including the highest public attention cases like arrest and trial of famous public figures, including the former senior official in the political section who are in charge of civil affairs or financial kind of a de facto financial minister for Hong Kong's government. So the Hong Kong's judiciary pretty much had been following the old tradition to assign the judges who are routinely independently assigned to make sure there's no conflict of interest, no favoritism or corruption. But now, with the new National Security Bureau, with the new special units on the investigation, prosecution, and trial in the judicial formats, and this law, according to the letter of the law, it will authorize the chief executive. Of course, the current one is Ms. Carrie Lam, who already demonstrated anything but independence of Beijing, bowing to Beijing's pressure and direction in every step of her action as a chief executive. So the law directs her with the authority to handpick any judges in the judiciary to try this so-called special national security cases, and supervised. So anybody who understands the Chinese cultural context on this word, supervise, 监督, would understand what it meant. That means direct. That means occupy. That means tell you what to do. That means order on behalf of Beijing the chief executive what to do, which judge they prefer, or what have already been arranged before the case. The result, the sentence, the so-called even evidence were all already pre-cleared, manufactured by the Chinese national security apparatus in the name of Hong Kong National Security Bureau. So this is basically the end of Hong Kong's judiciary independence, the end of Hong Kong's, the protection of Hong Kong's basic freedom of association, freedom of assembly, and this honestly has a huge ramification of endangering Hong Kong's freedom of religion or belief, religious freedom. So now I want to turn our attention about what does this mean to the Hong Kong's religious freedom and rule of law. And what does it mean? Does it apply? By the end of the day, the relationship between this former British colony, the special administrative region, so-called, after Hong Kong was handed over to China, with the promise of 50 years, one country, two systems in Hong Kong. And in terms of what does it mean to religious freedom in Hong Kong? I remembered in October 1996, my wife Heidi and I escaped from China after the persecution and imprisonment in Beijing. And we went to Thailand as a tourist first, and then after a week or so, we stopped in Hong Kong. Remember, that was October 1996. So Hong Kong was still under the British control, with Lord Chris Patten as the last governor appointed by the Queen in Hong Kong. So although we were told at that time by the Hong Kong old government that we should be careful of our movement, of our speech, our public appearance, because we were seeking refugee status and protection in Hong Kong. And we were told a lot of Chinese spies, security agents with the plain clothes were already positioned in Hong Kong, try to collect the information and intel about Hong Kong's freedom-loving citizens and politicians and foreign activities, certainly those exiled Chinese dissidents hiding in Hong Kong. So we had been very careful. But we were able to at least attend church worship services, by visiting different churches, and we even shared in some small groups in different Hong Kong's NGOs, student groups, even Hong Kong's seminaries. So at that time, we felt the freedom was still there, and of course, gradually, by the clock tickling on the countdown of the handover to China before July 1st, 1997, we have felt the atmosphere is pretty kind of tight and serious, and every day, ironically, we have seen the headlines on all the Hong Kong newspapers was like, this social association on workers, on union, or different kind of social groups put their advertisement, full page or half page on these major newspapers, and claiming, warmly welcome the People's Liberation Army soldiers to enter into Hong Kong to protect Hong Kong's the sovereignty of China as part of China, and there are some politicians made some very laughable comments. Even said, "Oh, finally, after some centuries of shame under the British control and as a colony, we are going back to the arm of the motherland, and everybody should be fine." And there are even a group of so-called Hong Kong citizens, patriotic group, and put an advertisement and claiming they are organizing a major welcome ceremony between the Hong Kong border and Shenzhen, the city next to Hong Kong, belongs to Guangdong province, to welcome the PLA soldiers. But we know everybody was kind of the Hong Kong, after being run by the British and by the United Kingdom, governed over there with a very strong judicial independence, rule of law, and a very neutral civil servant system. So the citizens were scared, and Hong Kong actually experienced the first major wave of exodus of its population. Really, millions of Hong Kong citizens immigrated to Australia, New Zealand, United Kingdom, Canada, of course, United States. But at least, some were still taking the position and to observe and watch what the Communist Party would do, and after the handover. Well, now the Chinese Communist Party showed its true color, and they're not interested in keeping Hong Kong as one country with two systems. With the capitalist system, with the protection of human rights, religious freedom, rule of law. And with this new national security law, it will jeopardize all of this. I can tell and predict because the Hong Kong's has played such a major role in helping the Chinese church, both the independent unregistered house churches, which is the majority of Chinese church, and the government-sanctioned Three Self-Patriotic Movement supervised churches and other religious institutions. According to this new national security law, they are all in danger. And they are all going to, I think, experience the gradual erosion of their freedom. They are certainly going to face a lot of threat under this text of the national security law. So traditionally, for many really decades and decades, the Hong Kong territory has been really a very important kind of a launching pad or a foundation, a ground or fertile ground in helping the Chinese church. Most of the Hong Kong churches, most of the Hong Kong theological seminaries, other religious institutions had been providing not only the theological education and biblical training, but also lots of charitable work, and from helping the natural disaster relief to those pandemics, to these vulnerable groups such as disabled and other social vulnerable people. And under President Xi's ruling, we have already seen the rapid deteriorating situation on religious freedom in China, the worst since the end or since the beginning of Cultural Revolution. And now this national security law, without any doubt, will provide a kind of a legitimacy, legitimize the erosion, the crackdown, even in Hong Kong. Because anyone, any individual, including any foreigners, and many foreigners actually stationed in Hong Kong, many mission organizations had been stationing there for many, many years, had they not only enjoy their own freedom of religion, they have their churches from different languages of different parts of the world, but also they are able to relatively get access or entrance into China to help the Chinese people, and whether it's religious or charitable. And when the earthquake in China happened in 2008, I mean, Hong Kong donated millions and millions of dollars and sent a lot of people also, and many Christian communities had been mobilized and helped. And so that is certainly now in jeopardy. And because according to the national security law, this text, so any individual, any organization, any institution who is suspected or deemed as a national security related threat, on the so-called terrorism. Remember, the Communist Party accused the protesters as terrorists, 12 years old to 80 some years old. To separation of Hong Kong from China, called separatist, and other national collaboration with overseas anti-China antagonistic forces. That's the Communist Party language. Means foreigners who are supporting protesters, who are involving or basically praying even. So these are all going to be deemed as national security threat. I think the international community now are ready, have a wake-up call to tackle China's aggressive action in Hong Kong. So I will talk more the next time about how much the international community can do and what the Trump administration have been thinking and considering to do to counter this China's aggressive action by totally disregard its international commitment and international law, actually, because the Hong Kong the joint declaration between China and the United Kingdom had been registered in the United Nations. So thank you very much for your attention, and please continue to pray for those endangered more than 7 million Hong Kong people, and many brothers and sisters are very, very concerned. Thank you.
Order your copy of this program from the GLC bookstore by calling the numbers or visiting the website on your screen. Please include the program number when ordering.